In 1938, Germany began conquering their neighbors. They annexed Austria, they demanded the Sudetenland, they took the rest of Czechoslovakia, and then they declared war on Poland, starting World War II. At no point did Western leadership seriously make a move to halt German actions, with the biggest Western betrayal coming at the Munich conference. The Germans had begun probing the Czech border, and it seemed like a war between the two nations was inevitable. But rather than honoring previous agreements and standing up for what's right, the great powers of Britain, France, Italy, and Germany met up in Munich to discuss the conflict. In trying to compromise and prevent a war, the West decided to give Germany everything it wanted, leaving Czechoslovakia too weak to prevent further territorial losses and a full overrun by the Germans only months later. Oh, yeah, and Czechoslovakia was not even invited to the meeting where its own partition was being discussed. But what if, after the Munich Agreement, after the great powers requested Czechoslovakia cede the Sudetenland to Germany, Czechoslovakia just refused? On paper, the conclusion sounds simple. Germany is far bigger, with a strong army, and Czechoslovakia's allies have abandoned it. Germany would conquer all of Europe within the next 4 years. Surely, Czechoslovakia isn't going to be an issue, right? Well, this view severely underestimates the Czechs. As Ukraine has proven, simple statistics aren't always enough to predict the victor and time frame of a war. The Czechs had a number of advantages going for them. They had built up extensive fortification networks around their borders, while the Sudetenland terrain was hilly and well defendable. The loss of these defendable borders are a big reason why Czechoslovakia failed to resist their collapse afterward. Besides that, the Czech army was large, modern, and well-equipped, with a very good military industry. The past 2 decades had been spent preparing for this war with Germany, but when it came, Czechoslovakia just folded. Why? Well, of course, it is very understandable. In their position, I would have done the same. Before the Munich conference, Czechoslovakia had an alliance with France, Yugoslavia, and Romania, while the Soviet Union was also promising support, and Britain was likely to join in as well. But Soviet support would prove meaningless, as Romania and Poland refused to allow them entry, out of a very logical fear of the Soviets just not leaving. Then the Munich Agreement happened, and France and Britain could no longer be counted on to support Czechoslovakia. Even worse, Romania and Yugoslavia too became far more hesitant in supporting the Czechs without French backing. The Czechs would have to fight this war alone. The military situation Czechoslovakia was preparing for was one where they would only have to hold out against Germany for long enough that France could get ready and put pressure on the German West. Czechoslovakia was not preparing for a one-on-one conflict with the Germans, which, however way you slice it, sooner or later they would lose, causing the total destruction of the Czechoslovak state. Giving up the Sudetenland and hoping that Germany was serious about peace seemed like the better option. Besides that, Czechoslovakia had serious internal issues. The Slovaks had serious doubts about the Union. Czechs made up 50% of the population, Slovaks only 16%. Besides this population overmight, the Czechs were also far more industrialized. During a war with Germany, there was a serious risk of a Slovak revolt in favor of the Germans, while both Poland and Hungary also openly claimed Czechoslovak lands. In light of all of these issues, Czechoslovakia chose dishonor before death. But one thing the Czechoslovaks lacked was hindsight, something we in the modern day do have. The Germany of 1938 was incomparable in power to the Germany that started World War II only a year later. You might think, how much of a difference can 1 year really make? Well, it's a lot. In 1937, Germany spent 2.3 billion on defense. In 1938, 7.4. In 1939, 12. Germany spent more in 1939 than the previous 2 years combined, and it made Germany substantially stronger in every field. Besides, a very big boost to the German military came from the practically free conquest of the remainder of Czechoslovakia. The Czechs were a global leader in military design and production. Specifically, Škoda was a major producer of guns, artillery, and modern tanks. The German capture of Škoda boosted their industrial capacity to such an extent Czechia was dubbed the Arsenal of the Reich. The army too, which was captured practically without fighting, had huge reserves of all sorts of equipment, estimated to be enough to arm half of the German army. Here is a partial list of equipment just handed to Germany for free. This equipment and the Škoda works both played a huge role in strengthening the German army right before the Polish and French campaigns. Then we have the economic factor. Germany had a huge problem by 1938. They struggled to import what they needed from other nations. The buildup of the German army was mostly funded by reckless spending, borrowing, and debt, mostly from the German population itself. The problem? Foreign nations want their own hard currency or gold, both of which Germany lacked. The free capture of Czechoslovakia did two things. It allowed Germany the capture of the Czechoslovak gold reserves, but even more insultingly, Czechoslovakia had moved 2/3 of their gold to Britain before Germany's invasion. Germany would request that Britain return that gold to the Germans. Britain agreed, and in the year before World War II, delivered 24 tons of gold to Germany. Then secondly, Germany would begin economically exploiting the Czechs, cheaply importing their goods. Both of these empowering effects on Germany are now removed. And not just removed, they are now replaced with a war. Even in the best case for Germany, where they completely overrun Czechoslovakia within weeks, hypothetically, this would already have the potential to weaken Germany a lot. Czechoslovakia could choose to destroy factories. Weapons would get used and thrown away by the Czechs. By the time Germany achieves an ultimate victory, they could be significantly weaker than in our timeline. Diplomatically though, it would mean that the conquest of Czechoslovakia is far less controversial, since they would be blamed for the invasion by not giving up the Sudetenland. By the end of such a scenario, we could see World War II breaking out months later, allowing for the West to build up for longer, while Germany is comparatively weaker. Whether that could be enough to fundamentally change the early course of World War II is difficult to say, but considering the French, I doubt it. Still, it allows the British a stronger position during the conflicts, while also giving the Soviets extra time to build up, potentially even forcing Germany to delay Barbarossa until 1942. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. But all that is assuming that Czechoslovakia is indeed overran within weeks. I personally don't believe in that narrative. I think it is far more likely that, at the very least, Czechoslovakia survives for months. And the longer Czechoslovakia holds out, the better their position becomes. They do have a couple of short-term issues. Poland is likely to invade a piece of rich industrial land on the border, weakening Czech morale. In the south, Hungary is likely to threaten intervention too, risking a two-front war for Czechoslovakia. Luckily, Romania and Yugoslavia would likely not accept such a Hungarian move. Worst case, I would expect that Hungary receives southern Slovakia for free. This way, Hungary gets most of what they want without the risk of war, leaving them satisfied for a while. This capitulation to Hungary, though, will likely trigger a Slovakian revolt. The Czechs fully expect Slovaks to die for them in the Sudetenland, but sell out the Slovaks themselves. Germany would promise independence and protection for Slovakia, and thereby make the war a lot more complicated for the Czechs. But that's the Czechoslovak long-term issue. German leadership also has three ticking problems themselves. First, diplomacy. France and Britain did allow for this German invasion to happen, but only because they feared the Germans. Because they assumed that they weren't ready for a conflict. Because they assumed that Czechoslovakia would quickly fold. Once it becomes clear that Czechoslovakia is not surrendering, Allied aid to the nation can increase. Other Eastern European states start supporting Czechoslovakia, at least diplomatically. Poland and France might eventually partially mobilize, and they don't even have to join to start putting pressure on Germany. If there is any risk of Poland joining the conflict, the threat of an invasion of Silesia alone would force Germany to rethink their operations in northern Czechia, while Germany also has to pull forces to put on the Polish border. Similarly, just the threat of France jumping in and invading the Rhineland shakes up German chances at victory. The second issue for Germany, their economy. As Europe witnesses Germany grinding down on Czech lines, sanctions could be placed on the nation. Some voluntary, some under pressure from the West. In our timeline, these issues were solved by an invasion of Norway, securing Swedish steel, and a partnership with the Soviets, supplying grain, oil, and other materials. Neither of these things can happen now, as unlike our timeline, the Soviets quite likely joined the pressure on Germany. But arguably Germany's biggest threat is itself. By 1938, the German dictator's position was far less stable than it would one day become. The annexation of Austria was a big boost to his reputation. But what really made him seen as a diplomatic genius in Germany was the Sudetenland transfer. He had humiliated the West, and confidence in his ability to lead Germany was at an all-time high. This war and the lack of progress, especially with the diplomatic and economic fallout of it, will start to weaken support for the regime. Specifically, the military had a plan to oust the ultranationalists from power, as they were really enthusiastic about the prospects of a war with the West in 1938. So, they hoped to coup the government to prevent it. Afterwards, they wanted to install the grandson of Wilhelm II to restore the monarchy. Was this plan likely to succeed? In our timeline, no. As mentioned, the Western capitulations and the swift expansion of Germany bolstered the ultranationalist government. But as German boys continued to die on Czech lines without fast process and the diplomatic tides of the war turn, the conspiracy might just catch a lot more steam. Broadly, there are three outcomes for Germany in this timeline. The first we already explored. Germany defeats Czechoslovakia faster than I anticipate. The second option is the Oster conspiracy being successful. When is impossible to say, but after continuous offensives fail to break the Czechs, the government is overthrown. The new government swiftly signs a peace deal with Czechoslovakia. No territory is exchanged, but the Germans offer some compensation to the Czechs, while trying to reintegrate themselves into Europe. Option 3, the conspiracy fails or is never launched. Still, Germany fails to make swift progress, and Europe becomes less and less afraid of Germany. Even if just Poland or just France intervenes, Germany will be in big trouble. Again, 1939 was crucial for the German build-up, and we just don't have that now. If Poland joins, Germany will not be able to swiftly overrun it. Rather, the two sides will get stuck in trench warfare, alleviating the situation for Czechoslovakia. Eventually, France will find the nerve to join in as well, which will get the ball rolling to a near guaranteed military defeat for the Germans. Now personally, I am most interested in the second scenario. So I decided to make a full video next week on what if the Oster conspiracy succeeded. Be sure to subscribe to not miss that. So, for the rest of this video, we will follow the third option. What might a potential peace deal look like? Well, France and Poland are leading the peace deal, and they are unlikely to be sympathetic to Germany. First item on the ticket, a complete restoration of the Treaty of Versailles. Army restrictions are reintroduced, Germany has to give up on Austria again, and the Rhineland is re-demilitarized. That's the baseline, but it gets worse. France almost certainly splits the Saarland off from Germany again, as it's a crucial territory rich in coal. But not just as a League of Nations mandate, it would be directly annexed into France. In the east, Poland would seek to gain all of these territories, likely gaining most of them, as well as annexing the free city of Danzig. Czechoslovakia would be uninterested in major territorial gains, though they might gain minor territories just for show. They would, however, seek international support in regaining their lost land to Hungary and get most of the German war reparations. As for politics, the ultra-nationalist regime falls. Even if the coalition doesn't force change, the regime wouldn't be able to handle such a loss. Potentially, the military launches a coup trying to restore the monarchy, or else German democracy is restored. The years of ultra-nationalist rule become known as the lost years. The future of German politics is very difficult to predict. Far-right extremism would be unpopular for a while, but far-left extremism, while internally popular, would never be accepted by the international community. Thus, some form of democracy is the only option left for Germany. From here, making further detailed predictions is difficult. We have Italy, which used the war to annex Albania, but is now stonewalled. Without a German distraction, I doubt that they would have the nerve to invade Greece or Yugoslavia. Though, should they try, humorously, we could see the same pattern play out here as with Germany previously. The West doesn't immediately join Greece, but failing military operations, coupled with increasing diplomatic, economic, and military pressure, shuts the Italians down. So, Italy has two options: don't expand, or go down in flames like the Germans did, destroying yet another European threat. This pattern is also repeated in Asia. Japan still invades China, but is unable to defeat them in any short time frame. Without the Germans in Europe, Japan is unable to start military operations in Southeast Asia. Yet, the war in China will continue to get more controversial, leading to America announcing increasing sanctions on the Japanese. Eventually, Japan is faced with a choice: listen to American demands and retreat from China, including Manchuria, or do as our timeline and strike the West. Except, there is now nothing distracting the Western powers, and the full might of the British, American, and French Navy will come to destroy Japan. Alternatively, trying to ignore the sanctions and just fight China is also a bad idea, as increasing support for China while Japanese industry grinds to a halt will ultimately lead to the same outcome. Japan cannot win without Germany. This leaves us finally with the Soviet Union. With Germany gone, all eyes are on them. It is, however, difficult to imagine Stalin starting a world war in this environment. He is far too careful for that, preferring the slow build-up, gathering Russia's industrial and military power, and playing the long game. Germany's war would have still presented an opportunity, perhaps one used to threaten the Baltic states or maybe even Finland. Whatever happens though, he wouldn't commit to a war with the West, and I don't see him doing something like starting a war with Poland. Most likely, his first major target is indeed Finland, and we can expect this alternate winter war to go just as poorly for the Soviets as in our timeline. Minor gains are eventually ceded, but that's about it. When the Winter War is over, Europe is at peace again, and any further Soviet move would likely result in a major European war against them, while the Western powers are much more confident after the Soviet embarrassment in Finland. Stalin wouldn't risk such a conflict, so in the short term, peace in Europe is far more likely. Finally, we have Czechoslovakia itself, and it would be severely weakened by this whole situation. They are the heroes that saved Europe from Germany, but it would have been very costly economically. They had to give up southern Slovakia to accomplish it. Ethnic tensions within the nation are greatly increased, while Hungary is still a major troublemaker in the east. One that is unlikely to win, mind you, but they could still cause yet another disruption for Czechoslovakia, weakening them substantially before others intervene. So, that's the state of Europe and the world I will leave you with. Thank you all for watching, and consider leaving a like and a comment, as well as subscribing. If you've enjoyed this video, click on the video on top to watch another in this series. If you've already seen it, then I'm sure that the bottom video is great too. Once again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.